Welcome to the 28th Miami Jewish Film Festival, the largest Jewish film festival in the world. We want to thank all of our members, sponsors, community partners, volunteers, all of you film lovers, and especially our presenting sponsors, SAGE, the Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education, and the Greater Miami Jewish Federation for their continued support throughout all these years. I'm Mary Jane Rochelson, and I'm a professor emerita of English at Florida International University, where I taught for 32 years. I'm a longtime fan of the Miami Jewish Film Festival, and I'm excited to be moderating this virtual conversation with film director Ted Hardin, theater director Karin Coonrod, and producer Elizabeth Coffman. All of them put together this film, A Gathering of Strangers, the making of the merchants in Venice, which is premiering at this year's festival. Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks.
Now, I will get started asking some very general and basic questions, which will allow our participants to give you a lot of information about themselves and about the project. So, would you each in turn tell us about yourselves, how you got into filmmaking and your profession, and how you decided to work on this project, originally called the Shylock Project. Now, of course, the film A Gathering of Strangers, um, the making of the Merchant in Venice. So, who would like to start?
Well, want me to dive right in?
Dive
Um,
right in,
I,
sure.
I love knowing that you're from FIT. So
FIU, FIU.
FIU, sorry, yeah,
Right.
right. I am from Ohio originally, and to escape Ohio, but it also was a deep interest of mine. I became enamored with everything marine biology.
Oh, yes,
So I
right.
was looking at FIU and other places uh, uh, around oceans, right, to study that. I ended up at Florida State, but I
Uh-huh.
sort of pivoted to study neurochemistry and other things. But that led to German studies, and in other words, I kept wanting to travel and join the ranks of all of my sort of the people that I aspired to have become at that point, to become a lifelong learner and just endlessly curious, right? And so my wife, who's on the Zoom call, Elizabeth Coffman, we started making a film in Louisiana
Mhm.
about the loss of land equals the loss of culture and history, and of course people and everything else, the ecosystem. And that study and documentary got us into a residency in Venice in 2013 with the Emily Harvey Foundation. And there, Venice is just a wonderful place for the curious minded and the people who are endlessly alive. And so we just went to town and meeting many people. And there is a larger documentary project about studying all of the challenges that Venice faces in terms of climate change, but also kind of corporate dynamics and also loss of land and loss of sort of the ability to preserve history and people's livelihoods and so on. Within that time there, we met Shaul Bassi, who we consider one of the cultural mayors of Venice, who has a vast Rolodex that includes new people we hear about every day in the entire world and probably even on other planets. And we began conversations with him, and then emerged this idea that is captured in the film um, during an interview for this larger documentary, by the way. So you see footage
Mhm.
of what will
Mhm.
eventually also have another life in this environmental documentary. So we heard him talk about some of his colleagues were imagining the most audacious experiment, which is inviting a performance, a live performance in the ghetto of Venice, which is the first use of that word ghetto coming from the Venetian ghetti, coal slag, and other sort of awful things where no one wants to live around, but that's where the first ghetto, of course, was erected, and then um, we know the rest of that history in terms of Jews being invited to Venice to participate in money lending. And it started from there. And then later, and maybe this is a good time to pass the baton to the origin of the play, because
Mhm.
Shaw also mentions in other areas that Karin Coonrod was
Yes,
in consideration. So I'll let Karin take over from there.
thank
Great.
you.
Okay. Yes, we collide in many areas, we three. So
Hmm.
I'm sure we'll pass the baton over to Elizabeth to close in on that one. But when I was a child, I was just to go back to your question, Mary Jane. I uh, really was involved in all the arts. I explored every corner of them, painting nonstop and writing music, uh, dance, and I realized eventually that that all kind of came into the theater. I felt very strongly and had a call into the theater when I was in Epidurus or Epidaurus, as we say in the Peloponnese in Greece. I
Uh-huh.
knew that that had to happen, and I was teaching for a few years in a boys' school, and then so I went to New York and went into theater to be a catalyst, to be it was just the call. So then what do? You just make it happen. Now to I started doing revisiting the classics and had an early company. Then I started another international company in Italy, because I'm half Italian actually. My mother was from Florence, and so I had the opportunity to go to Orvieto and to do the medieval mystery plays. And so I started Compagnia di Colombari in 2004. My friend, very close friend, who had seen a lot of my Shakespeare work, who's a Shakespearean at Yale, David Castan, um, is was particularly good friends with Shaul. They were talking in Venice and considering about this project. I received a letter, an email saying, "Would you like to do the Merchant of Venice in the Venice ghetto to mark the anniversary of its founding in conjunction with the 500th, 400th, excuse me, anniversary of Shakespeare's death?" And you're the one, I think, to do this, as what David said, because of my Italian heritage and because of um, having been in Italy many times, working with my company and also being a Shakespearean and teaching Shakespeare at Yale. So all of that. So of course it was very exciting. We decided, okay, let's all meet. So we met in London. And then after that that was later, that was in the summer around June. And then I went to Venice after that because I also had something I was doing in Orvieto. So I went to Venice and stayed with Shaw's mom in his house, in her house, and we met and we went through the ghetto. We went into the synagogue. We did we went all over, and it was really, we considered all kinds of possibilities. That was 2014. We decided 2015 that we should have a workshop. The Shylock Project was called, with um, the on the island. I can't remember. You'll remember the name, you guys.
Um,
Um, oh, I can't remember that. Is it?
oh,
Giudecca?
no,
No,
it's
not
the
Judecca.
Giudecca. It's oh, that's a funny anyway, there's a
Anyway,
lot
we'll
going on
find
in
out.
our heads.
We were on this big, huge island where there's a theater research, sort of connected to Ca' Foscari. And we were there, we stayed there and worked, and with Americans and Italians in English, we decided to do, and I had two dramaturgs. Anyway, so then that's what led us into 2016. We did major fundraising, because it was a huge project. We had to build stadium seating. we had gone twice through the year to decide what to do, I with my collaborators, and we knew we wanted to tread the stones of the ghetto, not build a stage.
Mm-hmm.
Everything was open to us, but what
Right.
made sense was to be in the thing itself, even though the thing itself is not in the play.
Right.
It was just,
But it sort of is. I
yeah,
mean, Shylock goes into his house.
yeah,
Jessica looks out the window, even though
that's right.
it is in the play.
That's
Yeah.
right. And that's an amazing moment in both the film and in the documentary where Ted is inside, and all the stories, the anecdotes around locating spaces and reserving, securing them for us. And what perhaps was the most delightful thing, I mean, we always started, I feel very strongly about doing work in Italy that it begins at the end of day and moves into the night, so that in the radical presence of the theater community, of the encounter between audience and actor, that we experience that together. And all the people that had balconies, they came out with their chairs. I remember seeing people just, all right, it's showtime. So
Yeah.
they came out and watched a play. It was,
Yeah, that's great. That's
yeah.
great. Yeah. So, Elizabeth, what would you like to tell us about yourself and add to your investment? Well, I guess you have several kinds of investments in the project, and anything that hasn't been said already.
Well, I can just add the strange, wonderful synchronicity between the three of us that
Mhm.
first, Karin Coonrod is one of our great theater directors. And Ted and I happened to be in Venice at the time that she was starting on the play. And Shal Bassi is the other person who perhaps could be on this call, who
Mhm.
interconnected us around the Shakespeare story, The Merchant of Venice. And he was very excited to be hiring one of the top Shakespeare directors in the world, as he described Karin to us.
Mhm.
So as documentarians, Ted saw, because I was in a hot Venetian apartment editing this other Flannery O'Connor
Uh-huh.
documentary that Karin Coonrod's also in, because
Right.
she
Yes.
has adapted Flannery O'Connor fiction. And so we were, because my background is as a literary person as well, growing up in the South. I love Southern
Hmm.
literature and was an English, you know, scholar and film historian, and that so these things all came together. And Ted and I had started an environmental documentary that we're going back to finish this spring in Venice, where we'll all be together again. um, and we interviewed Shaw for the environmental doc on Venice's climate crisis, and Shaw started talking about these other projects he was working on, one of which is on the 17th century Jewish poet Sarah Copia Sulam, where he had invited poet laureates and Rita Dove to write poetry around Sulam's poetry. And so we made a short museum installation around Sarah Copia Sulam's life. Anyway, that's
Yeah.
another project, but exploring the Jewish heritage, exploring the literary heritage. These are things that we all share in common, and found a way to tell the story.
And before we move on to the next question, I think this was really a wonderful introduction and more. I want to mention that the Flannery O'Connor documentary was eventually on American Masters on PBS and won an award. So I think that is worth noting too. Um, it was not entirely clear from the film whether you were just doing this one performance of the merchants in Venice in the ghetto, or if you did more. And I asked you this before we filmed the interview, and the answer is very interesting. So, Karin, would you like to repeat that answer for our audience? And Ted and Elizabeth join in if you have some additional words on that.
Sure. We we knew that, so we were in Venice at the hottest time. It was unbelievable, but we started, I remember it was the final dress was the 25th of July, and we played for about 6 performances in the ghetto. One of them on Friday was before Shabbat, so it was in the afternoon. And it was super hot. You can imagine it was like a
Yeah.
2 o'clock or something in the afternoon. Um, it was interesting because it was actually completely uh, uh, documented by La Rai, the RAI, and it was kind of like a director's cut. I was talking in Italian and in English throughout the whole thing. But then so
Mhm.
we played every day for 6 or 7 days, and then we went to Bassano del Grappa, which is a
Mhm.
festival up, just about an hour away, an hour and a half away. And that showed me that we could, in fact, do this inside as well. That was really instructive for me. Beautiful experience. And then we went into the Padova high security men's prison, which was the
Mhm.
first time that I've ever been on the inside. And we brought many of the company had gone on the inside, what was really thrilling. I mean, had never been on the inside, I want to say. One of them, so that was an extraordinary experience altogether. Ted and Elizabeth filmed that. So we have that, which, was, we had to excise some scenes, but that was an extraordinary because we involved the audience in the
Mhm.
play. And
Mhm.
so the prisoners were all participating with the red stoles that were made by Stefano
Wow.
Lau.
Mhm.
And then after that, in 2017, we did about 3 weeks in Montclair, New Jersey, uh,
Mhm.
at a festival where we got a great, notice from the New York Times. And then the next year, we went to the International Festival of Arts and Ideas in New Haven. And then through a lot of facilitation by Susanna Heschel, we went
Wow.
up to Dartmouth
Right.
and did it for another like 5, 6 days there. So it was like 2 weeks or so so it was at the at New Haven, and then about 6 days up in Dartmouth. So we were always hoping, we have all the costumes, we're hoping to do it again. Uh,
Great.
yeah,
Wonderful.
another time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to add to that,
Yeah.
so the film that, sorry, the film Gathering of Strangers that viewers would see has incorporated everything that Karin just described in terms of performances within the ghetto, and then also the rehearsals,
Hmm.
and then also a little bit of time traveling, so that from table reads, even conversations that happened years prior, and moments that are sort of consequential in terms of breakthroughs and so on. And then we might leap ahead to a rehearsal moment that is also where either actors are up around the table or literally in the ghetto during the day. But then also ultimately we'll see footage of the performers in the ghetto during the actual play's professional production and realization as well. Um, with the absence, with the exception of that final performance moment, which I shot over 8 days of actual
Wow.
dress
Mhm.
rehearsals and actual performances, and I did use some multi-camera for those performance moments, but everything else was a single camera. And so one thing it's useful to note is, as Werner Herzog often says, that filmmaking is much more athletic than it is aesthetic. Um, I have spent my career working with artists in various art centers, Wexner Center for the Arts and Banff Center, and facilitating artists on very limited budgets to try to get the most out of what they're interested in, and delivering it that for the audience is something that I teach to that. I practice it, and yeah, that's the athletic part, which led to me getting knee surgery after this film was was done. But I say that because the camera for productions and performance-based films like this, the camera has to be considered a character as well. We're inviting the audience in, but we all know the films that keep us looking and keep us wondering, even after the final image and credits roll, if it still resonates, it's because there's something asked of the audience. And of course, the alignment with how Karin directs and workshops her actors, very much an actor's director, but also curious of opening up spaces, right? And so the camera had to reflect and align with that strategy. And, I just, Elizabeth was like, you're going out again and shooting, here we are in beautiful Venice and we're working, 12 hours a day and 108-degree temperature inside studios and things like that. But I saw it was fascinating for me as a creative director and myself, just how creativity and breakthroughs and risk with the material were taken and sort of then actualized basically. And I saw that that is something the audience is probably most interested in because you can't see that while sitting in a theatrical seat. Even though it's the ghetto and it's fascinating, all of that's good. But I thought the documentary had to go beyond that, right? And so earlier in our introduction or conversation, we talked about there's a moment when Jessica, who's not in Shakespeare's writing, Jessica is not the star. Shylock and the Merchant are these other bigger roles, but there's something really unique happening with Jessica, and probably that is the closest audience alignment is Jessica as a witness character through history into these larger notions of mercy and justice and culture and heritage and all of the ethics and responsibility, right? And so documentarians know ethics and responsibility is part and parcel of everything we do at the shooting the stage, but also in the editing room, how we represent things, and if we can build in questions, especially the ones that audiences are going to have top of mind. It's sort of at least satisfies that moment, but then time continues marching on, and then other things change, and we can talk about some of those moments as well. But
before we get to Elizabeth, there are just two things that each of you said, Ted and Karin, that I'd like to put together into a question that you could probably answer pretty quickly. Karin mentioned La Rai, which was filming a whole performance, and Ted mentioned using some footage from the actual performance in the documentary. Was that the footage that La Rai produced? It wasn't. That was
no, so
footage that
so
you produced.
and I meant to say that because Karin
Yeah, yeah.
listed all of the instances that the play and all of the actors with changes, of course, different people were available at different times. So we shot everything except the last two final runs, the one in Dartmouth and the one I think also in New York, that second performance. But I think Karin has footage of that. But my point is there is a larger archive project uh,
Uh-huh.
and around this, and that's typical of a lot of documentaries. They do become archives in and of themselves. And I have a full length version of the play's performance cut together. I don't have the funding yet, to finish it out the way this documentary is, but it does literally exist.
Great.
Plus, extra of there is a run of the play in this maximum security prison in Italy, which has the lowest recidivism rate in the world.
Wow.
Very special place. All of the prisoners leave with money in a bank account and lots of skills. that ensure they can really enter back into life after their sentence serving their time is up. But we're sitting on a lot of other materials, which I know viewers always like to hear about if they're interested, and hopefully with some more fundraising, that's also an artistry around documentary making is to get some more funding to archive things properly. So.
Well, I hope that the Miami Jewish Film Festival will eventually show that film of The Merchant in Venice that you are working on, that you have put together and are putting together, because I think that's really important. Um, that's an important thing for people to see, along with the documentary, especially if they have seen this documentary. Elizabeth, would you like to add something?
Well, there's so many great ideas that have been brought up. And, part of what I was thinking just in terms of your film festival is, performing and filming in the Jewish ghetto and the tensions between how Shylock's character has been performed and directed, and the anti-Semitic heritage around that, combined with the Orthodox history in the Jewish ghetto and some real community hesitation and concern about the performance of this play in the ghetto, and that what Karin's direction clearly shows, and what Ted I think is trying to show in the doc as well, is how it's all about how the play is directed, and understanding the character of Shylock, and Karin is the person who can speak to this. But that's what I mean. I was not nearly as athletic as both Ted and Karin,
Mhm.
but I would occasionally come out and help hold a microphone and record some sound.
Mhm.
And I personally, and I'm an English major type, I
Mhm.
personally gained a totally new understanding of both Shakespeare and the play and the character of Shylock. And to me, and I watched the actors, Karin taught her actors and the dramaturge how to really think about the story differently. And for me, that's a big part of the value of what the film does too.
Yeah, I felt myself, having read the play many times and seen many productions, your documentary gave me a really wonderful new perspective on it. And I'd like to just mention two things quickly. I'm sure that the people, everyone in our audience who has seen the film was moved by these things too. But the words mercy in Italian, English, and Hebrew, which we see at the beginning and which we see at the end, and one of Shylock's final lines about what you take from me, when you take the foundation of my house, that comes from the end of the play and is repeated by Shylock, but appears on the screen. And then all of those parallel videos and texts from the hate crimes that took place during the time you were producing this documentary. I felt that was very powerful and very well done, and really added to the play itself. And I thought it was great. I have one more question. And then I hope we'll have a little more time. Um, what was it like, Ted, being the film director, directing a theater director? I had to ask that.
Well, that's kind of adorable framing, because directors are notorious for not necessarily being directable.
Ah,
However, one I think all knowing other languages, and then even in our documentary, we hear David Chowkirk talk about Shakespeare literally is a language, right?
mm,
But one aspect of being bilingual, which I am, speak German, and we're learning Italian, and
mhm.
other films have taught us other languages, Bosnian of all things. But being bilingual and being conversant in other kinds of areas, the idea of circumnavigation, which is a wonderful modality to like draw from, is sort of at play, right? And so effective communication is as you're speaking, you have to also be listening and being ready to respond. All good directors, and Karin is one of the best, know that really watching for the actor to be in those two modalities, listening and performing. It comes from a lot of great theories of directing, and Bogart's viewpoints and other things. But this idea of being a conversation partner is very important. So I was grateful to steal moments from Karin, and I have a few of those in the documentary where, I mean, I know exactly what the burden is on her shoulders in terms of actors and some budgets to the play and some budgets, the location and budgets. Common thread here. But yet the moment that Karin also has to attend to is, of course, how to get that inflection right, how to mirror back what the actor needs, or the lighting designer, or the sound designer, and so on, the musicians, the composer, all of those things. And I've also done some of that burden in my own filmmaking work. But anyway, so kindness is important when you do this kind of work. Patience, which is there's never enough patience, but you try, you try to be as human as possible. But I also think that moments that are really difficult, where someone is struggling deeply, they can be really important to share. Again, the ethics are at play. Some things are not, and you didn't capture enough in context, so you can't really get the whole story. And we know those kinds of documentaries as well. But in this case, Karin was just so wonderful and generous, even when it was just almost beyond capacity to ask her for that little snippet of interview here and there. But anyway, as Karin likes to say, it was joyous.
Thank you. And would you like to add to that last remark, Karin?
Yeah, contradict everything I just said.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it was such a great journey. We knew we were doing something, we were minting something in the Venice ghetto. And that was so important. Venice has become sort of a marketplace, right? It's people, so many people go there, and it is still an extraordinary jewel. I mean, it is a jewel to be there, to be working there. There can be no, it's something very special to us. We're feeling very privileged to be on the ground, boots on the ground in Venice. My grandmother was from Venice, so I just felt like, yes, this is more and more home. But there was an incident, for instance, once, there's a moment in the play where I had everybody, so the five Shylocks, right? By the Black Angels, they were dressed. So each of the actors that played Shylock played another character. And everybody else just played one. But the Shylocks each did double duty. And so when there was a moment when Jessica left, that was where the pain of the man, the human pain of the man as a Jewish man, as a single parent, as the daughter going with the Christian goyim. I mean, it was so painful. And Frank London, who was our composer, who the founder of the Klezmatics, I mean, he went up to what is called the Shylock House, stood on the roof and played the trumpet in the moment, and it was, and in the moment when they were being dressed, I asked all the company of actors, we took two scenes that Salanio and Salarino had been talking about, making fun of the Jews, making fun of Shylock. And I put those words into all their mouths to create a stage a world stage with in different languages. It was in French and German and English and Italian and all Spanish, of the making fun of the Jew coming up close to Shylock and whispering something. And I told those 5 Shylocks, I said, I want you to use this as preparation. This is your preparation, no matter what they say to you. They're coming up and they're making fun of you. And one of the girls, one of the actors said, can we do this in this place? And I said, yes, because we're making theater. And it's provocative, but we're making theater that frames, what is going on in this urban setting, in this place. And we're showing it, we're framing it and showing it, and how mercy is talked about, but it does not, the word doesn't even come into the play until halfway through. And it's when it's demanded of Shylock, when they realize, oh, we've really messed up here. So that moment of the 5 Shylocks, and then one of them howling, which is in the doc, and it's Jenny who does it, and she plays the Shylock number 3. And in that moment, the ghetto was completely silent. It was an astonishing event every single night. It was like you could hear, it was like the theater in Epidaurus. You could hear the smallest thing, on the stones. And so that was an accomplishment, just to say. And then that was the prologue for his cry for humanity, in all that cacophony. So yeah, so it was very, very special. We knew we were doing something very, very, very special, and minting it there. The international company,
a gathering of strangers, alluding to also all of those different nationalities that have historically gathered in Venice as a port and mercantile city. Yeah, Ted, I'm sorry, you
That's
wanted
right.
to.
Yeah, no, it's thank you for calling out that title. And the description Karin just gave us about the origins and then the sort of the actual coming together, that the end result of the scene. And you get a glimpse of the way Karin is speaking, as well as you can imagine how Karin was speaking with all the other creatives involved, from composer to actors and other designers. That's what I was also meta listening for as well. And so when I crafted that very scene that Karin is describing, I pulled from probably no fewer than 8 different days of footage, right? And so, as Ken Burns liked to say, film lies 24 frames a second, depending on your frame rate. But film, and Herzog talks about this truth, is that you're after an aesthetic truth for the audience, right? The audience doesn't necessarily need to care about the nitty gritty of where things are coming from. It's all audiences, but all recipients of good stories. We want to know, and we want to feel the resonance of truth and a truth position. Certainly, the actualities matter. I don't mean to say they don't, but truth is important. And one really important truth that is coming out of, hard things were said, and the actors who asked this question to Karin, can we literally say this in this place? That symbolizes so much, because and one other actor even said, on camera we have it, is the stones are listening, right? Jews perform, right? And you feel, and that's the actor's challenge, right? Of like, I'm performing a role and channeling all the truth and my soul into that role, but I'm literally standing in a place on a stage in front of audiences or in front of cameras. And so there's a human being. And again, that sort of duality is really important. And I think we're moving into a comfort level with that performers and creatives also are audience members too, right? We're implicated in this whole project of meaning making. And to that end, the reason why I included the number 5 has a lot of importance in this whole production. There are five Shylocks, but there are also five windows of the synagogue. And there's five sections of Shakespeare's play, right? And so then there's this other meta thing. There are five instances of terrible events, I call them, these quick montages. And they emerged from news items and things like that that are have the same time stamp as the play's rehearsal and production as we march towards the final performance nights. And they emerged, which this is part which is not in the film. They emerged because there was a French raised but Moroccan heritage actor who asked uh, um, Linda Powell, who plays Portia, Mateo asked Linda, "Who is this Freddie Gray? You know, I keep hearing in the news. Who is this named Freddie Gray? Something
Mhm.
about Baltimore. I don't know what that is." And I heard her explanation of Freddie Gray to someone who's not from the United States. And it was really interesting of like, here we are in Venice, this amazing city, but we're talking about police brutality in Baltimore,
Right.
and all of the contexts and things that emerge. And then it happened another time, and then Reggie Cathay actually speaks to it, and that is in the film. So those instances of the actors with Karin's facilitation were using anything they could to actually put into inside their performance, inside the production. And I thought, well, this documentary cannot just be yet another nicely shot documentary about a performance. It has to kind of speak to the times we live in. And so the production happened in 2016, but that date is crucial because around the world, 2014, 15, there was a lot of attacks on all kinds of other in the world. Certainly anti-Semitic attacks were on the increase, but also authoritarian regimes were on the rise as well. Viktor Orban in Hungary and other places. You know, it's like we have a different dynamic happening in the world. And so this date and this production, and then hopefully this documentary starts to be a conversational piece about what are we going to do about it? Because fear is not sustainable for humanity. Fear-based policies, ideologies around fear, we know how that ends. We've seen it many times before. We've also documented it many times before. So this is a bit of a pushback using sort of a media artifact in its own right to try to say, let's open up that space, and hopefully more strangers will join our gathering.
Thank you. And before I do the formal close of this really wonderful interview, Elizabeth, do you have any final observations that you'd like to share?
I mean, just a quick follow-up to what Ted was saying.
Yeah.
As a producer and an editor, I initially had a really hard time with including the news footage of the terrible events, as we called them. But Ted just gave a great explanation as to why they mattered with his vision of the film. And also the world's changed since 2016, and we've seen an increase in violence, religious violence, anti-Semitic violence, and it started to make more sense to me. And so as time has passed, sometimes that's what happens with documentary filmmaking too. It's got a longer place, hopefully, in history and as a documentation of how the world was changing at that time. We've also sadly lost two of the key
Yes.
actor performers in the play since 2016. And so it feels like a moment to dedicate to them as well.
Yes. Ned Eisenberg and Reggie Cathy. Yeah. Yeah. That was very, very sad and very moving also to see the dedication. Well, I want to thank Film director Ted Hardin, theater director Karin Coonrod, and producer Elizabeth Coffman for this wonderful conversation, which I enjoyed enormously and which I hope many people will see through the Miami Film Festival site. Once again, thank you to all our members, sponsors, community partners, volunteers, all of you film lovers, and especially our presenting sponsors, SAGE, the Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education, and the Greater Miami Jewish Federation for their continued support throughout all these years. And thank you, our audience, for participating in the 28th Annual Miami Jewish Film Festival. Thank you so much.